Asterisk. The hills have eyes. Asterisk. The RV rattled as it climbed the uneven dirt road, its old engine protesting every mile. Dust clouds rose in its wake, a gritty reminder of how far they'd come from civilization. Red hills loomed on either side of the narrow path, their jagged peaks casting long shadows that crept closer with the setting sun. Inside, the air was thick, not just with the sweltering heat, but with tension. "How much longer, Mark?" Lisa asked, her voice sharp. She was seated in the passenger seat, fanning herself with a crumpled map. Her usually calm demeanor had frayed over the hours, worn thin by the endless monotony of desert and dirt. Mark kept his eyes on the road. "Not much further," he muttered. "Not much further?" Lisa scoffed. "You said that an hour ago. This doesn't feel like a shortcut, Mark. This feels like a mistake." Kara chimed in from the back, grinning as she leaned over the seat. She was trying to lighten the mood, but her smile faltered when Lisa glared at her. "This isn't funny, Kara," Lisa snapped. She gestured toward the baby who was strapped into his car seat, fussing softly. "It's too hot for him. We should have stayed on the main road." Okay, I get it," Kara said, raising her hands. She leaned back, crossing her arms. "But seriously, it's not like we're about to get murdered out here. This isn't a horror movie." Mark's grip on the wheel tightened. "It's not a mistake," he said firmly. "GPS went out, and this road leads to the interstate. We just need to keep going." The RV lurched suddenly, hitting a pothole. A loud metallic clank echoed beneath them, followed by a hiss. "What the hell was that?" Lisa asked, her voice rising. Mark pulled the RV over to the side of the road, gravel crunching beneath the tires. "Probably nothing," he said, though his furrowed brow suggested otherwise. He stepped out, the door creaking as it swung shut behind him. Mark crouched by the side of the RV, his flashlight beam flickering over the wheel. His face darkened as he saw the damage. "Great," he muttered under his breath. The radiator was leaking, coolant dripping steadily onto the dirt. He wiped his hands on his jeans, glancing at the horizon. The sun was sinking fast, painting the sky in streaks of red and orange. Inside the RV, Lisa's voice called out. "What's wrong now?" Mark straightened, shining the flashlight toward the window. Lisa's silhouette was backlit by the dim interior light. "Radiator's busted," he replied. "We're gonna need water to refill it." "Water?" Lisa repeated, incredulous. "We don't have enough water for the engine, Mark. We barely have enough for us." Mark sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "There was a gas station about 10 miles back. I'll walk there. Get what we need." "Walk? At night? Are you insane?" Lisa snapped, her voice rising with panic. "It's not that far," Mark said. Lisa shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, we're not splitting up. We stay together." "Stay together and do what?" Mark shot back. "Wait for someone to magically drive by? We're in the middle of nowhere, Lisa." The baby started crying, his wails cutting through the argument. "Enough," Kara said, stepping between them. "Look, Mark's right. We can't just sit here. Let's all go together." "And take the baby out into the desert at night?" Lisa said, her voice breaking. She shook her head, clutching the baby closer. "No way." The conversation was interrupted by a sound, a faint guttural chuckle carried on the wind. All three of them froze. What was that? Kara whispered, her eyes wide. Mark turned, his flashlight sweeping over the hills. The beam of light revealed nothing but rock and shadow. Probably just the wind, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. Lisa's grip tightened on the baby. She didn't believe him. The decision was made to stay the night. They locked the RV doors and closed the blinds, trying to create a barrier between themselves and the oppressive darkness outside. Inside, the air felt stifling. Mark sat at the small dining table, flipping a pocket knife open and shut. Kara lay on the couch, scrolling aimlessly through her phone despite the lack of signal. Lisa sat by the window, her eyes fixed on the hills. The baby had finally fallen asleep, his soft breaths a small comfort in the growing unease. "I don't like this," Lisa murmured, breaking the silence. Mark looked up. "What?" "I don't like the way those hills look," Lisa said. She gestured toward the window, her voice low. "It's like they're watching us!" Kara chuckled nervously. "You're creeping me out, Lisa." Lisa didn't respond. The first sound came just before midnight. A soft thump on the roof of the RV. Mark froze, his hand gripping the knife. "Did you hear that?" Lisa nodded, her eyes wide. Kara sat up, glancing toward the ceiling. Maybe it's just an animal." Another thump, louder this time. Mark stood, gesturing for them to stay quiet. He crept toward the door, his footsteps barely making a sound. "Don't," Lisa whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't go out there." Mark ignored her, opening the door just enough to slip outside. The desert was eerily quiet. Mark shone his flashlight over the RV's roof, but there was nothing there. He turned, scanning the hills. Shadows danced across the jagged terrain, but nothing moved. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing. No response. He turned back toward the RV, but something caught his eye. A figure crouched at the edge of the light. It was hunched and misshapen, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Hey!" Mark shouted, raising his knife. "Who the hell are you?" The figure didn't move. Mark took a cautious step forward. The figure lunged, moving with terrifying speed. Mark barely had time to react before it slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. Its breath was hot and foul, its teeth jagged and yellow. Mark stabbed blindly, the blade sinking into something soft. The creature let out a guttural scream, retreating into the darkness. Mark scrambled to his feet, his heart pounding. He ran back to the RV, slamming the door behind him. "Lock everything," he said, his voice shaking. "They're out there." The pounding started an hour later. At first, it was sporadic, a single thud against the side of the RV, followed by silence. But it grew louder, more insistent, until the entire vehicle shook. "What do they want?" Lisa whispered, her face pale. Mark peeked through the blinds, his hands trembling. "Oh, God," he muttered. Outside, dozens of figures surrounded the RV. Their bodies were twisted and deformed, their skin blistered and raw. Some crawled on all fours, their movements jerky and unnatural. Others stood upright, their eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. "They're waiting us out," Kara said, her voice trembling. Mark turned to her, his face grim. "We can't stay here." "And go where?" Lisa snapped. "We're trapped!" The baby started crying again, his wails piercing the silence. Outside, the creatures howled in unison, their voices a twisted mockery of human laughter. Just before dawn, the creatures attacked. The first window shattered, glass spraying across the small space. A clawed hand reached through, swiping at the air. Mark swung his knife, slicing into the hand. The creature howled. The creatures pressed against the RV, their grotesque faces leering through the shattered windows. Their guttural growls filled the small space, drowning out the baby's desperate cries. "Back!" Mark shouted, swinging his tire iron wildly at the nearest one. The blow connected, sending the creature reeling, but three more surged forward, their claws raking against the metal walls. Lisa clutched the baby to her chest, her body shaking with sobs. "They're going to kill us!" she screamed. "No, they're not!" Mark yelled, though his voice cracked with fear. He swung again, forcing a clawed hand to retreat, but he was quickly overpowered. A creature reached through the broken window, its long, spindly arm snaking toward Kara. She slashed at it with her knife, slicing deep into its flesh. Black ichor oozed from the wound, but the creature didn't flinch. It grabbed her wrist and yanked, pulling her toward the window. "Help me!" Kara screamed, kicking and thrashing, but its grip was iron strong. Mark lunged, grabbing her legs and pulling with all his strength. "Let her go!" he roared, slamming the tire iron onto the creature's arm. The creature released her, but the force sent Kara crashing to the floor. Blood smeared her wrist and she cradled it, sobbing. "Thank you," she gasped, but her gratitude was short-lived. The door buckled under the weight of the creatures outside, their combined force shaking the entire RV. "Mark!" Lisa screamed. "Do something!" Mark looked around desperately, his eyes landing on the kitchen drawers. He ripped them open, searching for anything that could be used as a weapon. "Gasoline," he muttered, his mind racing. He grabbed the small canister they kept for emergencies and turned to Kara. "Do you still have your lighter?" Kara nodded shakily, fumbling in her pocket. She tossed it to him, her blood-slicked fingers trembling. Mark moved to the shattered window, splashing gasoline onto the creatures outside. They hissed and shrieked as the liquid doused them, their twisted faces contorting in pain. "Burn, you bastards!" Mark snarled, flicking the lighter. He lit the gasoline and flames roared to life, engulfing the creatures in a blinding inferno. Their screams were deafening, a cacophony of agony that reverberated through the hills. But the fire wasn't enough. For every creature that burned, more appeared, crawling out of the shadows like an endless tide. "They're not stopping," Lisa whispered, her voice hollow. The RV shook violently as the creatures resumed their assault. The walls buckled and the roof groaned under their weight. "We have to get out of here," Mark said, his voice frantic. "Where the hell are we supposed to go?" Kara shouted. Mark didn't answer. He grabbed the baby carrier and shoved it into Lisa's arms. "We make a run for it now." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "We won't make it. We don't have a choice!" Mark snapped. He opened the back emergency hatch, the desert air rushing in. "Go!" he shouted, pulling Lisa through the opening. Kara followed, clutching her knife tightly. Mark was the last, slamming the hatch shut behind him. The desert stretched endlessly before them, illuminated by the pale light of the moon. The hills loomed like silent sentinels, their jagged peaks casting long shadows. "Which way?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. Mark pointed toward a faint ridge in the distance. "There. If we can get to higher ground, maybe we can lose them." "That's a big maybe," Kara muttered, but she followed anyway. They ran, their breaths ragged and their feet kicking up clouds of dust. The creatures were close behind, their howls echoing through the night. Lisa stumbled, nearly dropping the baby. Mark caught her, pulling her back to her feet. "Keep moving," he urged. The ridge seemed impossibly far, each step taking them closer to exhaustion. The baby's cries grew louder, a piercing wail that seemed to draw the creatures closer. "Shut him up!" Kara hissed. "He's a baby!" Lisa snapped. "What do you want me to do?" Before Kara could respond, a creature lunged from the shadows, tackling her to the ground. "Kara!" Mark shouted, turning back. Kara fought fiercely, stabbing the creature repeatedly. Black ichor sprayed across her face, but the creature didn't relent. Its claws sank into her stomach, ripping through flesh and muscle. "Run!" Kara screamed, blood bubbling from her lips. Mark hesitated, his face contorted with anguish. "Go!" Kara shouted again, her voice breaking. Mark grabbed Lisa's arm, pulling her forward. Kara's screams echoed behind them, a haunting reminder of the danger they couldn't escape. They reached the ridge just as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon. Mark collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath. Lisa sank beside him, clutching the baby tightly. "Is it over?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mark looked back toward the hills. The creatures had stopped at the base of the ridge, their glowing eyes watching them from the shadows. "I think so," he said, though his voice was filled with uncertainty. The silence was deafening. Mark stood, his legs shaking. "We need to keep moving. If we stay here—" A sharp whistle cut through the air, stopping him mid-sentence. Lisa looked up, her face pale. "What was that?" Before Mark could respond, a gunshot rang out. He turned, his eyes widening as a group of men emerged from the hills. They were heavily armed, their faces obscured by masks. "Thank God," Mark said, raising his hands. "We need help." The men didn't respond. One of them raised his rifle, aiming directly at Mark. "No!" Lisa screamed, stepping in front of him. The man hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. "They're clean," another man said, his voice muffled by the mask. The first man lowered his rifle, but his posture remained tense. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "This is their land." "Their land?" Mark repeated, his voice filled with disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about?" The man didn't answer. He turned to the others, gesturing toward the ridge. "Burn it," he said. The men moved quickly, setting up barrels of fuel and lighting them. Thick black smoke rose into the air, obscuring the hills. "You're not safe," the man said, turning back to Mark and Lisa. "They'll come for you." "Who are you?" Lisa asked, her voice shaking. The man didn't answer. He gestured for them to follow. Mark hesitated, but Lisa grabbed his arm. "We don't have a choice," she said. They followed the men into the smoke, their faces hidden by the darkness. Hours later, the RV was gone, swallowed by fire and shadow. The hills were silent once more, but the creatures watched from the depths, waiting. And as the sun set, the screams began again. This time there was no escape.